The alert did not simply arrive, it cut through the system like a violation. Administrator Telvon was deep in his rest cycle when every neural channel in his chamber flared awake at once. Not a gentle notification. Not a standard escalation. This was something older. Something that had not been used in over 30,000 cycles. A priority signal marked in absolute red. For a moment, Telvon didn't move. His two hearts slowed instead of racing, a survival instinct learned over centuries of governance. Signals like this didn't mean urgency. They meant irreversibility. Slowly, he rose from his resting platform, for limbs adjusting to balance as the chamber lights activated in sequence. The air shifted, responding to his biological profile, but he barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the pulsing symbol hovering in the center of the room. It wasn't just red. It was ancient red. A classification reserved for discoveries that could alter civilization-scale assumptions. Telvon extended one limb and accepted the transmission. "Report," he said, his voice steady, but quieter than usual. There was a pause. That was the first sign something was wrong. His assistant, efficient, precise, never hesitant, did not respond immediately. When the voice finally came through, it carried something Telvon had never heard before. Not fear. Not excitement. Something closer to disbelief. "Administrator, we weren't sure if we should wake you." Telvon's gaze hardened. "You already have," he replied. "Explain." Another pause. Then, "The deep-range scout vessel Morning Light has completed its sweep of the Orion Spur." Telvon exhaled slowly. "That sector was cleared centuries ago. There is nothing there that justifies." "Sir," the assistant interrupted, breaking protocol. "That alone was enough to shift the atmosphere. There is something there." Silence filled the chamber. Telvon felt both of his hearts begin to beat faster now. "Define something." "It's a system," the assistant said carefully. "Yellow-class star. Multiple planetary bodies. Standard formation." "Then this is a mistake," Telvon said. "You woke me for routine stellar data." "No, sir." The voice dropped slightly. "That's not the problem." A flicker of light expanded into a full holographic projection above Telvon's console. Data streams began cascading, orbital paths, atmospheric compositions, electromagnetic readings. At first glance, everything appeared normal, predictable, unremarkable. Telvon almost dismissed it. Until one line froze in place. Not because the system flagged it. Because his mind did. Artificial radio emissions. His posture changed instantly. "Zoom," he said. The display obeyed. More data surfaced. Signal patterns. Repeating structures. Non-random transmission clusters. Telvon's breathing slowed again, but this time, not from calm. From focus. "Continue," he ordered. The assistant hesitated. "Administrator, there's more." "Say it." Another delay. Then, quietly, "We ran a comparative genetic scan using remote atmospheric sampling." Telvon's entire body went still. That protocol was never used casually. It required authorization, oversight, justification. "You exceeded your authority," Telvon said, voice low. "Yes, sir." "Explain why." The answer came in a single sentence. "We thought it might be a coincidence." Telvon stepped closer to the projection. "What kind of coincidence?" The data shifted. A new layer appeared. Biological markers. Genetic sequencing fragments. Ancient reference alignment. And then, a match. Not partial. Not theoretical. Exact. Telvon felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not fear. Not yet. Recognition. A word formed in his mind long before he allowed himself to say it. "No," he whispered. Behind the channel, his assistant finally said it out loud. "Administrator, we believe we have located the origin world." Telvon closed his eyes for half a second. 30,000 cycles of records. 50,000 cycles of searching. A myth repeated so often it had become background noise in galactic history. A story no one truly expected to confirm. He opened his eyes again. "Show me the third planet." The display rotated. A blue sphere came into view. Cloud systems swirling. Oceans reflecting starlight. Continents marked by irregular light patterns, artificial. Alive. Telvon stared at it in silence. And for the first time in centuries, he did not feel in control. "Administrator," his assistant asked carefully. Telvon didn't look away. When he finally spoke, his voice was no longer quiet. It carried weight. Finality. Something that would ripple far beyond this room. "Wake the council." A pause. "All of them, sir." Telvon's eyes remained fixed on the planet. "Yes." The red signal pulsed once more in the chamber. But now it meant something different. Not just urgency. Not just danger. Something far more disruptive. Telvon spoke one final sentence, half to his assistant, half to himself. They didn't disappear. A breath. They stayed. The council chamber had not been filled like this in over 10,000 cycles. Not for war. Not for extinction events. Not even for first contact. 800 species, each representing a civilization, a history, a version of intelligence, sat in a silence that felt unnatural. Because silence, in a chamber like this, meant one thing. No one knew what they were about to see. Administrator Telvon stood at the center platform, the holographic projection of the system suspended above him. He had not spoken since entering. He was waiting. Watching. Measuring the room. Council Speaker Moraveth finally broke the stillness. "You called an absolute assembly," she said, her voice calm but edged with something sharper beneath. "That privilege has not been exercised lightly in recorded history." Her gaze fixed on him. "Explain." Telvon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he rotated the projection slowly. A yellow star. 8 planets. Standard orbital spacing. Familiar. Safe. Predictable. A ripple of quiet confusion moved through the chamber. This system, Telvon began, was catalogued as complete. He paused. Empty. A few representatives shifted. Not alarmed. Not yet. Just impatient. Moravatha's expression didn't change. "And yet you are standing here." "Yes," Telvon said. He gestured. The projection zoomed inward. Planet by planet. Gas giants. Rock formations. Asteroid belts. Nothing unusual. Nothing that justified this. A low murmur began to rise. Until Telvon reached the third planet. And stopped. The image stabilized. A sphere of blue and white filled the chamber. For a moment. No one reacted. Because at first glance, there was nothing wrong with it. Atmosphere composition appeared within expected ranges. Hydrosphere coverage, extensive. Temperature bands, stable. Even vegetation signatures, primitive, but not unheard of. It looked like any number of habitable worlds across the galaxy. And that was the problem. Moravath leaned slightly forward. "Administrator," she said, more firmly now, "this is a life-bearing planet. Rare, but not unprecedented. You have interrupted." "Look closer," Telvon said. His voice cut through the chamber. Not loud, but absolute. The data shifted. New layers unfolded. Electromagnetic readings. Radiation signatures. Orbital anomalies. Then, patterns. Artificial. Repeating. Structured. The murmurs stopped. Every eye in the chamber fixed on the projection. "Those are transmissions," someone said quietly. "Yes," Telvon replied. Another voice. "Pre-industrial." Telvon didn't respond. Instead, he expanded the signal range. The patterns sharpened. Frequency bands widened. Encoded complexity increased. Then, a translation algorithm flickered across the display. Fragments of meaning began to form. Sound. Language. Noise that was not noise. A representative from the upper tiers spoke, disbelief creeping into their tone. "That is not primitive." "No," Telvon said. "It is not." The projection shifted again, now showing the planet's dark side. Lights. Thousands of them. Clustered. Organized. Growing. The chamber went completely silent. Urbanization, Moraveth said slowly. Yes. On that scale. Yes. A pause. Then the first wrong conclusion surfaced. It must be a lost colony, one delegate said quickly. An isolated settlement. That would explain the development without records. Another voice joined. Or an unregistered expansion. A rogue civilization. Or automated remnants from a collapsed species. The ideas came faster now, each one an attempt to force the unknown into something manageable, something familiar. Telvon let them speak. For exactly 6 seconds. Then he ended it. No. The word dropped into the chamber like gravity. They are not a colony. The data changed again. This time. Biological. Genetic sampling pulled from atmospheric particulates. Incomplete. Fragmented. But enough. Enough to run a comparison. The ancient database opened automatically. A system so old most species no longer referenced it. Because it pointed to something no one expected to matter anymore. Origins. The alignment sequence began. Lines of data shifting. Matching. Reconfirming. Rechecking. Then locking. A perfect match. The chamber did not erupt. It didn't react at all. Because for a brief moment, no one understood what they were seeing. Moraveth was the first to process it. Her voice came slower now. Careful. Controlled. Run that again. It has already been verified, Telvon said. Run it again. Telvon nodded. The system complied. The same result appeared. Unchanged. Unarguable. A representative near the lower ring whispered. That's not possible. Another. The origin templates are extinct. They have to be. They left. They vanished. They did not vanish, Telvon said. And now, finally, he turned to face the chamber. Every eye on him. Every species waiting. Not for data. For meaning. For 50,000 cycles, he continued, we have operated under a single assumption. He let the silence build. That the originating species of 47 colony civilizations disappeared. No one spoke. No one moved. Telvon's voice lowered slightly. But assumptions are not evidence. He gestured toward the planet. That world is not a remnant. Not a colony. Not an accident. Not a mistake. It is active. The display shifted one final time. Surface movement. Vehicles. Aircraft. Orbital objects. Thousands of them. Coordinated. Intentional. Alive. They are not extinct, Telvon said. A breath passed through the chamber like a shockwave. They are not lost. Another. They are not primitive. And then. The final line. Delivered without hesitation. They are still here. Silence. Total. Absolute. Moraveth stared at the planet for a long moment. Then, quietly, identify the species. Telvon didn't look at the data. He didn't need to. He had already accepted it. The word felt strange in his mouth. Ancient. Familiar. Impossible. Humanity. The chamber reacted this time. Not loudly. Not chaotically. But deeply. Because every species present knew that name. Not from records. Not from science. From stories. From fragments. From myths that refused to disappear. Moravetha's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Earth. Telvon nodded once. Yes. A long silence followed. Then, from somewhere in the chamber, a question that changed everything. If they never left? Another voice continued it. Then what have they been doing for 50,000 years? No one answered. Because no one had an answer. Telvon looked back at the planet. At the lights. At the signals. At the movement. And for the first time since the alert, he felt something close to unease. Not because humanity had survived, but because of something far more unsettling. They hadn't just survived. They had continued. Alone. Unobserved. Unregulated. Unrestricted. Telvon spoke again, softer this time. Almost to himself. We thought we were searching for a lost past. He paused. Eyes fixed on Earth. We may have found something else entirely. A longer silence. Then, we found something that never stopped evolving. The silence did not break. It deepened. Because now the council understood what they were looking at. And understanding made it worse. Moraveth remained still, her gaze fixed on the projection of Earth, but her thoughts were no longer on the planet itself. They were on the implications. "Open the archive," she said quietly. The command rippled through the chamber. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then, a system older than most civilizations in the room began to respond. The Origin Archive. Rarely accessed. Almost never referenced. Because it documented a time before structure. Before order. Before the galaxy learned how to control itself. The air above the chamber shifted as a second layer of projection unfolded, separate from the live data. Ancient. Fragmented. Incomplete. But still, there. Telvon watched carefully. "You believe this is necessary?" he asked. Moraveth didn't look at him. "If we are wrong," she said, "we confirm it." A pause. "If we are right, we understand what we are dealing with." The archive flickered. Corrupted segments repaired in real time. Symbols translated into modern formats. And then, text began to appear. Not data. Not measurements. Records. Observations. Warnings. A low murmur spread through the chamber as delegates leaned forward. Because these weren't scientific entries. They were cautious. Emotional. Unusual for a record system designed by rational species. The first readable line stabilized. Initial contact, species designation, human. The chamber stilled again. Another line followed. Classification, unresolved. A representative from the upper tiers spoke. Unresolved. That is not a valid classification. "No," Moraveth said softly. "It isn't." More text appeared. Behavioral patterns inconsistent. Rapid adaptation observed. Emotional variability exceeds predictive models. The words were clinical, but the meaning beneath them wasn't. Another line surfaced. Slower this time. As if the system itself hesitated to display it. Standard containment protocols ineffective. That changed the atmosphere. Noticeably, a Kazati delegate leaned forward, scales shifting slightly. "What containment protocols?" they asked. Telvon answered. "Historical containment procedures for emerging species. Observation. Limitation. Controlled exposure." And they failed. Telvon didn't answer immediately. The archive did. Subject species does not respond predictably to restriction. A second line followed immediately after. Restriction increases adaptation speed. The chamber shifted again. This time, unease. Because that violated something fundamental. Most species slowed under pressure. Stabilized under control. That was how civilizations survived long enough to mature. But this suggested the opposite. Moravetha's voice was quieter now. "Continue." The archive complied. Visual fragments appeared. Old recordings. Distorted. Partial. But enough to understand. Images of early human settlements. Primitive by current standards. But moving. Changing. Expanding. Faster than they should have. Timeline compression, one analyst whispered. They're advancing too quickly. Another fragment. Conflict. Fire. Destruction. Then, reconstruction. Even faster. A pattern began to form. Growth. Collapse. Recovery. Acceleration. Again. And again. And again. They destabilize, a delegate said. "No," another replied, voice tight. They iterate. That word hung in the air, because it implied something dangerous. Intent. Not chaos. Learning. The archive continued. Human behavioral cycle, experiment, failure, adaptation, expansion. A pause. Then a final addition. Cycle duration decreasing. Telvon felt both of his hearts beating harder now. Because that wasn't history. That was a trajectory. Moraveth spoke again. Is there any record of their departure? The archive searched. Cross-referencing. Reconstructing. Then, a final entry appeared. Unlike the others. Not observational. Not analytical. This one was, deliberate. Recommendation. Do not return to origin world. The chamber reacted instantly. What does that mean? Who wrote that? On what authority? Moraveth raised a single arm. Silence returned, but it was fragile now. She read the line again. Slower. Do not return to origin world. Telvon stepped forward slightly. That was not a fear-based warning, he said. No, Moraveth agreed. It was a precaution. A Kazati delegate narrowed their gaze. Precaution against what? No one answered immediately. Because the archive didn't explain. It simply ended. No conclusion. No resolution. No outcome. Just absence. Which was worse. Because it meant something had interrupted the record. Or something had made further recording irrelevant. The chamber remained quiet for several seconds. Then, a voice from the lower levels spoke. Soft. Uneasy. If they were that unstable. Another voice continued. How did they survive? Telvon turned back to the projection of Earth. To the lights. The movement. The signals. They didn't just survive, he said. They advanced. Moraveth finally looked away from the archive. Back to the present. To what level? She asked. Telvon gestured. New data replaced the archive feed. Modern scans. Fresh analysis. Undeniable. They have achieved controlled energy distribution across the planet, he said. Primitive computational systems. Atmospheric flight. Orbital infrastructure. The data updated again. Faster now. Satellite networks numbering in the thousands. Global communication systems. Autonomous defense detection. The Kazati delegate's voice sharpened. Defense. Telvon didn't hesitate. Yes. What scale? A pause. Then. Planetary. That word hit harder than anything before it. Because planetary defense implied something very specific. Awareness. Preparation. Expectation. They knew something might come, Moraveth said quietly. Telvon nodded. Or they prepared anyway. Another delegate spoke. Do they possess weapons capable of self-destruction? Telvon didn't look away from the data. Yes. How many? A brief silence. Then. Enough. That answer echoed. Because it didn't need a number. It implied excess. Overcapacity. Intentional redundancy. The chamber shifted again. Fear was no longer theoretical. It was forming shape. They are unstable, one representative said. They are unregulated, another added. They are accelerating without oversight. They have no external control systems. No governing authority at the galactic level. No integration protocols. Moraveth raised her arm again. But this time, it took longer for the room to quiet. Because now the idea had taken hold. Not curiosity. Not wonder. Concern. Telvon spoke into that tension. We searched for them for 50,000 cycles, he said. We assumed extinction. He paused, letting the next words land properly. We were wrong. A long silence followed. Then, the Kazati delegate spoke again. Low. Measured. Dangerous. Then answer the real question. Telvon met their gaze. What question? The delegate leaned forward slightly. If this species evolves faster under pressure. A pause. What happens when they realize they are no longer alone? The chamber went completely still. Because for the first time, the situation reversed. This was no longer about discovering humanity. This was about something far more unsettling. Humanity discovering them. Moravaith closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. Resolved. Prepare a first contact mission, she said. A few delegates reacted immediately. That is reckless. That is premature. That is dangerous. Yes, Moravaith said. All of those things are true. She turned back to the image of Earth. But ignorance is worse. Telvon studied her carefully. You believe we can control this? He asked. Moravaith didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, she didn't know. No one did. And that uncertainty was the most dangerous element of all. Finally, she spoke. No. A pause. Then. But we can choose how it begins. Her gaze remained fixed on the planet. On the lights. On the signs of a species that had grown in isolation for longer than most civilizations had existed. Because one thing is now certain. The chamber listened. Every species. Every mind. Waiting. Moravaith's voice dropped slightly. Not louder. But heavier. We did not find a lost world. A breath. We found an uncontrolled one. The word uncontrolled did not leave the chamber. It lingered. It spread. And then, it evolved. Because once spoken, it forced every species present to confront something they had avoided for thousands of cycles. Not all intelligence followed the same path. And not all civilizations matured safely. A representative from the preservation faction rose slowly. Tall. Thin. Deliberate. His species had survived longer than most, not through strength, but through caution. Speaker, he said, voice precise, we are approaching this incorrectly. Moravaith did not look at him. Then correct it. The delegate inclined his head slightly. We are treating this as a rediscovery. He gestured toward the image of Earth. It is not. A pause. This is first contact with an unregulated civilization that has developed in complete isolation for 50,000 cycles. The words landed heavily. Because framed like that, humanity was no longer a lost origin. It was an unknown variable. A risk. The delegate continued. We must assume the worst until proven otherwise. A few representatives nodded. Others remained still. Telvon crossed one of his lower limbs. And what, exactly, is the worst? He asked. The delegate didn't hesitate. They have reached a level of technological development sufficient to alter their planetary environment. The display shifted. Atmospheric scans. Chemical imbalances. Industrial signatures. They modify their world without full understanding of long-term consequences. Another layer appeared. Heat distribution anomalies. Energy spikes. Localized environmental damage. They experiment on a planetary scale. A second delegate stood. And yet they survived, she said. The first delegate turned slightly. Survival is not stability. That distinction changed the tone again. Because it was true. Survival did not mean control. Telvon stepped forward. Continue, he said. The data shifted again. This time. Weapons. At first, the information appeared incomplete. Fragmented. But then it stabilized. Fission signatures. Test detonations. Historical records reconstructed from residual radiation patterns. A timeline formed. Short. Violent. Accelerating. Moravaith's voice dropped. They split the atom. Yes, Telvon said. How long after achieving industrial capability? Telvon glanced at the timeline. Then back at her. Less than 2 centuries. The chamber reacted. Not loudly, but sharply. Because that was wrong. Fundamentally wrong. Most species took thousands of cycles to reach that threshold. Not because they couldn't, but because they understood the danger. They advanced too quickly, someone said. No, another replied quietly. They didn't slow down. The data continued. Stockpile estimates. Global distribution. Escalation patterns. Then, a final number. Projected destructive capacity. Enough to eliminate all complex life on the planet. Multiple times. The Kazati delegate leaned forward. They built extinction-level weapons. A pause. And kept going. Telvon nodded once. Yes. Silence. Then, have they used them? The delegate asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Telvon answered carefully. Yes. The chamber shifted. A ripple of tension. How many times? Twice, Telvon said. A strange reaction followed. Not relief. Not horror. Something more complicated. Because two uses implied something unexpected. Limitation. Restraint. Moravaith noticed it immediately. They stopped, she said. Telvon inclined his head slightly. Yes. Why? Telvon didn't answer right away. Because the data didn't fully explain it. Instead, he brought up a different set of information. Cultural records. Fragments of communication. Translated broadcasts. Images. Stories. Grief. Regret. Memory. They learned, he said finally. That word unsettled the chamber more than the weapons. Because learning implied change. And change implied unpredictability. A preservation delegate spoke again. Or they paused. Another added. Or they are waiting. A third. Or they lack the resources to continue. Each explanation tried to force humanity back into a predictable model. Telvon shook his head slightly. No. The display shifted again. Modern data. Active systems. Operational readiness. They still maintain them. Moravaith's gaze sharpened. So they possess the capacity for self-destruction. And choose not to use it, Telvon finished. The contradiction settled over the chamber. Heavy. Unresolved. A Kazati strategist spoke next. Low. Measured. If they can destroy themselves. A pause. They can destroy others. That was the turning point. Because now, the threat was no longer internal. It was external. The delegate continued. What is their current space capability? Telvon responded immediately. Pre-FTL. A slight shift in the room. Relief. But only briefly. They have not achieved faster-than-light travel. Another delegate exhaled. Then they are contained. Telvon didn't react. Because he had already seen the next part. They have achieved orbital infrastructure within approximately 1 century of their first successful flight. The relief vanished. Completely. That is not possible, someone said. It is, Telvon replied. The display updated again. Satellite networks. Space stations. Lunar activity. Expanding trajectories. They went from atmospheric confinement. He zoomed the timeline. To orbital dominance. Further. In less than 100 years. Silence. Then. The realization. If that rate continues, Moravaith said slowly. Telvon finished the thought. They will reach interstellar capability far sooner than projected models allow. A delegate from the outer system spoke. How soon? Telvon didn't soften the answer. A fraction of the time it took any of us. The chamber went still again. Because now the equation had changed. This was no longer about what humanity was. It was about what humanity would become. And how fast. The preservation delegate spoke again. More urgently now. They must be contained. Another voice joined. Quarantined. Observed. Restricted. We cannot allow uncontrolled expansion at that rate. The words began to overlap. Stacking. Escalating. Fear turning into policy. Moravaith raised her arm again. This time. It took effort. Silence. The chamber obeyed. Barely. She turned back to Telvon. One question. He nodded. She held his gaze. Do they know we exist? Telvon paused. Just long enough to matter. Then, no. A collective breath moved through the chamber. Relief. Temporary. Fragile. Moravaith continued. And if we do nothing? Telvon didn't hesitate this time. They will eventually discover us. How? They are already looking. The display shifted one final time. Deep space transmissions. Exploration signals. Probes. Mathematical messages sent into the void. Primitive. But intentional. They are searching for something, Telvon said. Moravaith's voice dropped. For us. Telvon nodded. Yes. Silence again. But this silence was different. Because now, there was a countdown. Not measured in cycles. But in inevitability. The Kazati delegate spoke one final time. If they find us first. A pause. We lose control of the encounter. Moravaith closed her eyes briefly. Then opened them again. Decision made. Then we do not wait. She turned to the chamber. To hesitate is to surrender initiative. Her voice hardened. We will not allow first contact to occur on their terms. The words carried weight now. Direction. Authority. We go to them. A ripple of reaction spread immediately. That is reckless. That is necessary. That is dangerous. That is inevitable. Moravaith did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Prepare a first contact vessel, she said. Her gaze returned to Earth. To the lights. To the signals. To the species that had grown beyond every model designed to predict it. We will meet them before they meet us. A pause. Then, more quietly, because if there is one thing this data makes clear. She looked across the chamber. At every species. Every civilization. Every carefully controlled system that had taken millennia to stabilize. It is that humans do not wait. The projection of Earth rotated slowly in the center of the chamber. Alive. Active. Uncontained. Moravaith spoke one final line. And this time, there was no doubt in it. They accelerate. The decision spread across the galaxy in less than a single cycle. Not as rumor. Not as speculation. As fact. First contact had been authorized. And not with a new species. Not with a developing civilization. But with something far more uncertain. Something older. Something that had grown without them. Captain Zur received the order in silence. She stood alone on the bridge of the Harmonious Endeavor, the most advanced diplomatic vessel ever constructed, as the transmission completed its final sequence. For several seconds, she did not move. Not because she didn't understand the order, but because she understood it too well. Behind her, the stars drifted slowly across the forward display. Calm. Unaware. Unchanged. Repeat the directive, she said. Her first officer complied immediately. Primary objective. Establish peaceful first contact with species designation humanity. A pause. Secondary objective. Assess threat level and developmental trajectory. Another pause. Tertiary objective. Maintain initiative. Zur closed her eyes briefly. Maintain initiative. That was the part that mattered. Because it meant one thing. They were not just meeting humanity. They were trying to stay ahead of it. Time to departure, she asked. Immediate, the officer replied. Course already calculated. Of course it was. The decision had not been made lightly. It had been made quickly. And that, more than anything else, unsettled her. Zur turned toward the central display. Show me everything we have. The data appeared instantly. Historical fragments. Behavioral projections. Archive warnings. Modern scans. Conflicting. Incomplete. Unstable. Just like the species they described. Her second officer, a Trali, known for analytical precision, stepped forward. We have compiled all available information on human behavioral patterns, he said. Zur glanced at him. And? He hesitated. That alone was unusual. And the conclusion? She pressed. The Trali exhaled slowly. There is no stable conclusion. A faint shift passed through the bridge. Not panic, but discomfort. Zer nodded once. Explain. They exhibit contradictory traits, the officer said. Extreme cooperation and extreme conflict. High emotional volatility paired with advanced problem-solving. They form bonds rapidly. He paused. And break them just as quickly. Zer considered that. That describes many species at early stages. Yes, the trolley said. But not at this level of development. That was the problem. Humans were not behaving like a species at their stage. They were behaving like something misaligned. Continue, Zer said. They prioritize connection over efficiency, he added. That is inefficient. Yes. And yet. They succeed. That contradiction again. It kept appearing. And each time. It made less sense. Zer turned back to the display. Archive warnings, she said. The system complied. The same line appeared again. Do not return to origin world. Zer studied it carefully. Context, she asked. Unknown. Author. Unverified. Reason. Not recorded. Zer exhaled slowly. Then it is not a warning. The trolley tilted his head slightly. It is incomplete information. A third officer spoke. Captain, there is something else. Zer turned. Yes. The officer brought up a new set of data. Live feed. Real time. From long-range sensors. Earth. Closer now. Clearer. More detailed. Zer stepped forward. Explain. We began passive observation as soon as the mission was authorized, the officer said. And? Another hesitation. They are active. Zer's expression didn't change. In what way? The officer expanded the feed. Orbital paths lit up across the projection. Hundreds. No, thousands. Objects moving in coordinated patterns. Traffic. Structure. Purpose. They have established a dense orbital network, the officer said. Communication, observation, and defensive alignment. Zer's gaze sharpened. Defensive. Yes. How advanced? The officer paused. Then, more advanced than expected. That was not reassuring. Define expected, Zer said. We anticipated early-stage orbital systems. And this? This is organized. A silence fell over the bridge. Because organization implied planning. And planning implied awareness. Zer spoke again. Are they aware of us? No confirmed detection, the officer said. A pause. Then why defensive systems? No one answered immediately. Because the implication was uncomfortable. They weren't reacting. They were prepared. Zer straightened slightly. Continue approach. Yes, Captain. The ship adjusted course. Stars shifted. Earth grew larger. Closer. More real. Zer felt something unfamiliar settle in her thoughts. Not fear. Not exactly. Something sharper. Uncertainty. She had conducted first contact with 43 species. Each one different. Each one unique. But all of them. Predictable within range. This was not. Captain, the trolley said quietly. Yes. I have reviewed the human communication data. Zer glanced at him. And? They send signals into deep space. That is not unusual. No, he said. But the content is. Zer gestured for him to continue. They are not warnings. Not territorial claims. Not defensive statements. He paused. They are invitations. That word shifted something. Zer frowned slightly. Define. The trolley brought up translated fragments. Mathematical sequences. Images. Sounds. Music. Patterns designed not to repel, but to be understood. They are attempting to be found, he said. Zer stared at the data. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, That contradicts the archive. Yes. That contradicts the threat model. Yes. That contradicts every projection we have. Yes. A silence followed. Then Zer spoke, more quietly now. Or we are misunderstanding the model. The bridge remained still. Because that possibility was worse. Captain, another officer said. Estimated time to system entry, 6 standard units. Zer nodded. Prepare full communication protocols. Yes, Captain. She turned back to the forward display. Earth now filled a larger portion of the view. Blue. Bright. Alive. Not hidden. Not silent. Broadcasting. Waiting. The contradiction settled deeper. They build weapons capable of destroying themselves. They prepare defenses against unknown threats. They evolve faster than any model predicts. And yet, they send invitations into the void. Zer spoke softly, almost to herself. They are either the most dangerous species we have ever encountered. A pause. Or the most open. The Trali responded quietly. Those two traits are not mutually exclusive. Zer didn't answer. Because she was beginning to understand something. Something subtle. Something the data didn't say directly. This wasn't a species that fit into categories. Not hostile. Not peaceful. Not stable. Not unstable. Something else. Something harder to define. Captain, the sensor officer said suddenly. Zer turned. Yes. We are approaching the outer boundary of their system. A pause. And another hesitation. Then, we are being scanned. The bridge went completely still. Zer stepped forward. Confirmed. Yes. Source. Multiple points. The display lit up. Beams. Invisible to the eye, but clear in the data. Sweeping across the ship. Analyzing. Measuring. Not random. Not passive. Intentional. They see us, the Trali said. Zer felt it then. Not fear. But something very close. Because the timeline had just collapsed. They had not arrived first. They had not maintained initiative. Humanity had already taken it. Open communication channel, Zer said. On all frequencies. Yes, Captain. The system activated. Signals transmitted. Waiting. Silence. For exactly 3 seconds. Then, a response. Clear. Immediate. Not distorted. Not confused. Precise. A voice. Translated automatically. Calm. Controlled. And completely unexpected. Unidentified vessel, the voice said. This is Earth Orbital Network. A pause. Then, we've been tracking your approach. The bridge froze. Zer did not move. Did not speak. Did not breathe. Because everything they had planned, every assumption, every projection, collapsed in that single sentence. The voice continued. Please hold your current position. Another pause. Then, something no one on the bridge had prepared for. Do you require assistance? No one on the bridge spoke. Because no one had prepared for this. Not the tone. Not the wording. And definitely not the question. Do you require assistance? Captain Zer stood perfectly still, eyes locked on the transmission display as if movement might disrupt whatever fragile reality had just formed. They were supposed to be in control. They were supposed to initiate contact. They were supposed to define the tone. Instead, they were being greeted. Captain, the Trali said quietly. Zer didn't respond immediately. Her mind was moving too fast. Recalculating. Reframing. Rebuilding everything she thought she understood about this moment. They identified us, she said finally. Yes. They tracked our approach. Yes. They initiated structured communication. Yes. A pause. And they offered assistance. The Trali hesitated. Yes. That was the part that didn't fit. Zer stepped forward slowly. Open the channel, she said. It's already open, the communications officer replied. Zer nodded once. Then activated the transmission. This is Captain Zer of the Galactic Council vessel Harmonious Endeavor. Her voice was controlled, measured, professional. We acknowledge your transmission. A brief pause. We are here to establish first contact with your species. Silence followed. Not long. Just enough to feel intentional. Then, the same voice returned. Slightly warmer this time. Welcome. The word landed softly, but its impact was immediate. Because it wasn't cautious. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't even particularly surprised. It was natural. We were wondering when you'd arrive, the voice continued. Zer's expression didn't change, but something inside her did. You were expecting us? She asked. Not specifically, the voice replied. But statistically, it was inevitable. A faint shift moved through the bridge. That wasn't how first contact conversations were supposed to go. No fear. No confusion. No hesitation. Just acceptance. Please maintain your current position, the voice added. We're coordinating a proper response. Zer narrowed her gaze slightly. Define proper. A pause. Then, you traveled a long distance to get here, the voice said. We figured the least we could do was be ready. Ready. That word carried weight. Zer glanced at her officers. Clarify, she said. The response came instantly. We've prepared multiple reception environments. Another pause. Different atmospheric compositions. Variable gravity ranges. Nutritional options based on projected biochemistries. The bridge went completely silent. Because that was not possible. Not for a species that had never made contact before. You prepared for multiple species? Zer asked. Yes. How? A brief pause. Then, we guessed. That answer made it worse. Because it wasn't arrogance. It wasn't confidence. It was something else. Something simple. Something human. We analyzed your approach, the voice continued. Your ship design suggests a multi-species crew. We didn't want anyone to be uncomfortable. Zer felt something shift in her chest. Not fear. Not confusion. Something far more disorienting. This wasn't caution. This was consideration. You're offering accommodation, she said slowly. Yes. For unknown biological systems. Yes. A pause. Without confirmation. Another pause. Yeah. The simplicity of the answer disrupted the entire exchange. Zer had expected complexity. Protocol. Layered negotiation. Instead, she was speaking to someone who treated this like hospitality. Captain, the trolley whispered. Zer raised one hand slightly. Not now. She kept her focus on the transmission. You are aware, she said carefully, that we are not of your species. Yes. And that our biological requirements may be incompatible with your environment. Yes. And that there are risks involved in direct interaction. Another pause. Then, we know. Zer waited. Because that should have been followed by hesitation. Caution. Concern. Instead, it's worth it. The words settled into the bridge like gravity. Zer felt it. Every officer felt it. Because that answer didn't come from strategy. It came from something else entirely. Why? Zer asked. This time, the pause was longer. Not uncertain. Just thoughtful. Then the voice returned. Because you came all this way to meet us. A breath. We're not going to make that harder than it needs to be. Silence. Deep. Heavy. Zer didn't realize she had taken a step closer to the console until she stopped moving. You don't see us as a threat, she said. It wasn't a question. The response came gently. Oh, you definitely could be. The bridge tensed instantly. But the voice continued before anyone could react. So could we. Another pause. That's not really the point. Zer's eyes narrowed slightly. Then what is? This time, there was no hesitation. Connection. The word landed differently than anything else so far. Not technical. Not strategic. Not defensive. Human. Zer felt something unfamiliar tighten in her thoughts. This wasn't how power was usually expressed. This wasn't control. This wasn't dominance. This was openness. And that made it harder to predict than anything she had encountered before. Captain, the communications officer said quietly. Zer didn't look away. Yes. They are transmitting coordinates. The display updated. A location within Earth's orbital structure. A large installation. Non-military. Civilian designation. That's one of our stations, the voice explained. Neutral ground. Easier for everyone. Zer studied the data. No visible weapons. No aggressive positioning. Just access. You're inviting us aboard, she said. Yes. A pause. No pressure. That phrase caused a visible reaction across the bridge. Because it implied something subtle. Choice. Not demand. Not control. Choice. Zer exhaled slowly. You understand the significance of this moment. Yes. And you are proceeding without formal protocol. Yes. Why? The answer came without delay. Because we don't know your protocol. A beat. But we do know how to welcome someone. That was the second shift. The first had been unexpected. This was something else. Something deeper. Zer turned slightly, looking at her crew. They were all watching her. Waiting. Not for orders. For interpretation. Because this situation had moved beyond standard procedure. This wasn't first contact anymore. This was something different. Zer turned back to the transmission. You are aware, she said carefully, that our arrival was not announced. Yes. And yet you prepared. Yes. How long have you been tracking us? A slight pause. Then. About 2 of your days. The bridge froze again. Because that meant. They hadn't just detected them. They had studied them. Analyzed them. Prepared for them. And then. Chosen how to respond. Zer spoke again, more quietly now. You had time to prepare a defensive response. Yes. And you chose not to. Another pause. Then. We chose something else. Zer felt it then. The realization. Not fully formed. But enough to understand the direction. This species did not react the way others did. They didn't escalate. They didn't withdraw. They didn't mirror threat with threat. They did something else. Something far more difficult to counter. They redefined the interaction entirely. Captain, the trolley said softly. Zer didn't look at him. I know. Because she did. For the first time in her career. She had no predictive model for what came next. And that was not because humanity lacked structure. It was because they operated on something outside of it. Zer activated the channel again. Her voice steady. Resolved. We accept your invitation. A brief pause. Then. The voice returned. Warmer now. Almost. Pleased. Great. The word echoed across the bridge. Simple. Uncomplicated. And completely disarming. We'll guide you in, the voice continued. And Captain. Zer tilted her head slightly. Yes. Another pause. Then. Welcome to Earth's neighborhood. The transmission ended. Silence filled the bridge again. But this time. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't fear. It was something far more unsettling. Zer slowly lowered her hand from the console. Her thoughts moving through everything that had just happened. Every expectation. Every model. Every assumption. Broken. Replaced. Not with chaos. But with something else. Something she didn't fully understand yet. The trolley spoke first. What just happened? Zer didn't answer immediately. Because she needed to choose the words carefully. Not for them. For herself. Finally. She spoke. We made contact, she said. A pause. Then, more quietly, on their terms. The docking process was flawless. That, more than anything, unsettled Captain Zer. No hesitation. No inefficiency. Human technicians guided the harmonious endeavor into position with a level of precision that matched, if not exceeded, standard galactic protocols. And yet, nothing about it felt rigid. It felt natural. As if they had done this before. As if welcoming unknown vessels was not an anomaly, but a possibility they had already accepted. Docking complete, the navigation officer reported. Zer nodded once. Atmospheric analysis. The science officer checked his readings again, just to be certain. Stable. Adjusted for multi-species compatibility. A pause. They accounted for us. Zer didn't respond. Because she already knew. The airlock cycled. A soft mechanical release. And then, the door opened. Captain Zer stepped forward first. As protocol required. As expectation demanded. What she saw did not match anything she had prepared for. There was no defensive line. No guarded posture. No visible tension. Instead, there were humans. Standing in a loose formation. Not rigid. Not rehearsed. Just waiting. At the front stood a single individual. Smaller than Zer expected. Dark hair. Steady posture. Eyes focused, but not aggressive. The human stepped forward slightly. And smiled. Zer paused. Because that expression. It wasn't in any threat model. Captain Zer, the human said. Her voice matched the one from the transmission. My name is Chen Wei. A brief, almost casual gesture. Welcome. The word landed again. Just as disarming as before. Zer studied her carefully. No visible fear. No forced confidence. Just presence. You are the representative of this world. Zer asked. Chen tilted her head slightly. One of many, she said. But for now, yes. Zer processed that. Not unified. Not centralized. Complex. Your species does not present a singular authority, Zer observed. Chen smiled slightly. No. A pause. But we cooperate when it matters. That answer should have been concerning. It wasn't. It was simply accepted. Chen gestured behind her. We've prepared a reception area. Zer hesitated. You prepared this in 2 days. Chen nodded. We didn't sleep much. There was a faint shift among the human group. Some smiled. Others exchanged brief glances. It wasn't arrogance. It was shared effort. Zer stepped forward. Her crew followed. Crossing the threshold into human space. The corridor beyond was wide. Clean. But not sterile. There were details. Small things. Color variations. Textures. Signs of use. Life. Humans moved through the space naturally. Some paused. Some stared. Some waved. Waved. Zer slowed slightly. They are not afraid, she said quietly. Chen glanced at her. Should they be? Zer didn't answer. Because the question itself felt misplaced. They entered a larger chamber. And this time, Zer stopped completely. The room had been transformed. Not into a single environment. But many. Sections divided by transparent fields. Each one adjusted. Atmosphere. Gravity. Temperature. Different. Carefully labeled. Prepared. Tables arranged with objects. Food. Liquids. Unknown substances, yet clearly organized with intent. Seating structures of various shapes and sizes. Some elevated. Some grounded. Some designed for beings that did not resemble humans at all. Zer turned slowly, taking it in. You built this, for us. Chen nodded. We tried. A pause. We weren't sure what would work. The honesty in that statement carried weight. More than certainty would have. You created multiple environments, Zer said. Yes. For species you have never encountered. Yes. Zer studied her again. Why? Chen's expression didn't change. But her answer came softer this time. Because you matter. That word, matter, settled differently than anything else so far. Zer felt it. Not as logic, but as impact. Her crew began to move. Slowly, cautiously, exploring. The science officer approached one of the tables, scanning the contents. His eyes widened slightly. It's compatible, he said. Zer glanced at him. You're certain? For most of us, yes. Chen stepped closer. We ran simulations, she said. Biochemistry models. We made guesses. Another pause. Some of them might be wrong. The science officer looked at her. You're admitting uncertainty. Chen nodded. Of course. A small silence followed. Because that was not how advanced species usually presented themselves. They projected certainty, control, perfection. Humans didn't. They presented effort. The difference was significant. Across the room, interactions had already begun. The communications officer was speaking with a human scientist, both exchanging rapid information. The engineer was examining structural systems, alongside a human technician who seemed excited. Not cautious. Not guarded. Excited. Zer watched it all. Trying to understand. Trying to categorize. Failing. Because nothing here followed a single pattern. Everything was fluid. Then it happened. A small movement. Fast. Unpredictable. A human child broke from a nearby group. Running. Directly toward one of Zer's crew. Commander Throck. The Kazati. Massive. Armored. A being that had ended conflicts before they began. The child stopped in front of him. Looked up. Eyes wide. Curious. Not afraid. Not even slightly. Zer felt her entire body tense. Every instinct. Every protocol. Every possibility. Collapsing into that single moment. The child tilted her head. You look like a dragon, she said. The translation system processed it instantly. Throck did not move. Did not speak. For the first time in centuries. He hesitated. I do not know what that is, he said finally. The child smiled. It's okay, she said. They're cool. A pause. Then, can I touch your scales? The room froze. Zer felt it. Every eye shifting. Every mind calculating risk. This was the moment. The one where things could break. Where misunderstanding could escalate. Where difference could become threat. A human adult moved quickly toward the child. No. But Throck raised one massive arm slightly. Stopping her. Slowly. Carefully. He lowered himself. Reducing his size. Reducing his presence. Meeting the child at eye level. You may, he said. Soft. Measured. The child reached out. Small hand against armored scale. Contact. Zer held her breath. The child's face lit up instantly. They're warm, she said. A smile. Bright. Unfiltered. Thank you, Mr. Dragon. The moment held. Then shifted. Something invisible. Something fundamental. The tension didn't snap. It dissolved. Completely. Zer felt it. Across the room. Across her crew. Across the humans. A boundary had been crossed. Not physically. Emotionally. And it had not resulted in fear. Or conflict. Or caution. It had resulted in connection. Throck remained still for a moment longer. Then slowly rose again. Zer watched him closely. Because something had changed. Not in his posture. But in his presence. He looked at the child. Then at the humans. Then at Zer. And for the first time. He did not look like a warrior. He looked uncertain. Chen stepped beside Zer quietly. They do that, she said. Zer didn't look at her. Do what? Chen watched the room. The interactions. These. The movement. They make things simple. Zer's voice lowered. This is not simple. Chen smiled slightly. No. A pause. But they think it is. Ze finally turned toward her. Why? Chen considered the question. Then answered. Because if you start with fear, a small breath, you never get past it. Ze looked back at the child. Now laughing. Now talking. Now completely at ease beside a being that could have ended her life without effort. And she understood something. Not fully. Not completely. But enough. This species did not eliminate fear. They moved through it. Without permission. Without certainty. Without guarantees. And somehow, it worked. Throck approached her slowly. The child still nearby. She asked to touch my armor, he said. Ze nodded. I observed. He paused. Longer than usual. I allowed it. Yes. Another pause. Then. Something unexpected. I did not feel threatened. Ze studied him carefully. That is unusual. Yes. He looked back at the child. Then at the humans. Then. At himself. She made a decision, he said. To trust. A pause. And I responded. Ze felt it. That shift again. Not strategic. Not logical. Something else. Captain, Throck said quietly. Ze met his gaze. Yes. He hesitated. Then. Spoke the line that would stay with her long after this moment ended. These beings are dangerous. Ze stilled. Explain. Throck's voice lowered. Not with fear. But with clarity. They do not conquer. A pause. They do not intimidate. Another. They do something far more difficult. Ze waited. And then. He said it. They make you care. Silence. Deep. Unavoidable. Ze looked across the room again. At her crew. At the humans. At the child. At the space that should have been filled with tension. But wasn't. And for the first time since arrival. She understood the warning. Not fully. But enough. This was not a species that imposed control. This was a species that created connection. And connection was far harder to defend against. Ze spoke quietly. Almost to herself. This changes everything. Chen glanced at her. Yeah, she said softly. It usually does. The first contact report reached the Galactic Council before Captain Ze's ship had even cleared Earth's orbit. Not summarized. Not filtered. Transmitted in full. Every word. Every interaction. Every moment. Including the one no one could stop replaying. A child. An armored war commander. And the absence of fear. The chamber filled again. Faster this time. More crowded. More volatile. Because now. This was no longer theory. It was evidence. Speaker Moravaith did not call for order immediately. She let the noise rise. Arguments. Voices layered over voices. Different languages. Different priorities. Different fears. They are manipulating emotional responses. They bypassed defensive instincts. They established trust too quickly. That is not trust, that is influence. Influence without consent. Cultural contamination. They're destabilizing baseline interaction protocols. They are redefining engagement structures. The words clashed, built, stacked, until finally, Moravaith raised her arm. Silence. It took longer this time, but eventually, the chamber obeyed. She looked down at the central display, at the frozen image, the child, the Kazati, contact. She spoke slowly. Captain Zer's report confirms multiple conclusions. She gestured. Data began to unfold. Layered. Precise. Humanity possesses advanced social adaptability. Rapid emotional bonding capabilities. Non-standard conflict resolution patterns. She paused. Then. None of which align with established galactic models. A preservation delegate stood immediately. And that is exactly the problem. He stepped forward. Voice controlled, but tight. They do not follow protocol. They do not establish hierarchy. They do not maintain controlled engagement boundaries. He gestured toward the image. They collapse them. A ripple of agreement followed. They form attachments immediately. They reduce threat perception artificially. They override caution. Moravaith watched him carefully. Are you suggesting intent? The delegate didn't hesitate. I am suggesting effect. That distinction mattered. Because it meant, even if humans weren't trying to manipulate, they still were. A second delegate rose. From a colony world. Human descended. But evolved. Different. And what is the alternative? She asked. The preservation delegate turned toward her. The alternative is control. She shook her head. No, she said. The alternative is stagnation. That word shifted the tone instantly. Because it attacked something deeper. Not fear. Complacency. You saw the report, she continued. They prepared for species they had never met. They created environments they could not fully understand. They admitted uncertainty. She stepped forward. And they welcomed us anyway. A pause. That is not instability. Another. That is courage. Murmurs spread again. Different this time. Less fear. More division. The preservation delegate responded sharply. They possess extinction-level weapons. Yes, she said. They advanced faster than any known model. Yes. They operate without centralized authority. Yes. They break protocol. She met his gaze. Yes. A silence followed. Then. And they still chose not to harm us. That landed. Hard. Because it was undeniable. They had the advantage, she continued. They detected our approach first. They prepared for our arrival. They controlled the environment. A pause. And they chose hospitality. The chamber shifted again. Not unified. Not resolved. But moving. Moravaith spoke. Continue. The delegate nodded. You call them dangerous, she said. And you are right. A ripple of reaction. But she didn't stop. They are dangerous because they change things. She gestured around the chamber. This system, our system, has been stable for 10,000 cycles. A pause. And in that time. Her voice lowered slightly. What has changed? Silence. Because everyone knew the answer. Very little. The preservation delegate stepped forward again. We have peace. Yes. We have order. Yes. We have control. Yes. She held his gaze. And we have stopped growing. That hit deeper than anything else so far. Because it wasn't an attack. It was a truth. Uncomfortable. Unavoidable. Moravaith watched the room carefully. The reactions. The shifts. The hesitation. Then. Another voice entered the debate. Commander Throck. The Kazati. He stepped forward slowly. The chamber quieted instinctively. Because when a species built on war chose to speak, it mattered. I have reviewed the recordings, he said. His voice was low. Measured. But carrying weight. I have also experienced direct interaction. A pause. They are not predictable. Agreement spread quickly. They are not stable. More agreement. They are not controlled. The chamber leaned toward him. Waiting. Because they knew what came next mattered. Throck looked at the image. The child. The contact. Then. He continued. They are not weak. The tone shifted. Subtly. But completely. They are capable of destruction, he said. Yes. They are capable of chaos. Yes. They are capable of rapid, uncontrolled expansion. Yes, yes, yes. The chamber aligned again. Fear rebuilding. Structure returning. Then. Throck spoke again. And broke it. They are also capable of restraint. Silence. They are capable of adaptation. More silence. They are capable of choosing not to use their strength. The preservation delegate stepped forward. That is temporary. Throck turned toward him. Is it? A pause. You have studied their history, Throck continued. They have already used their most destructive weapons. Yes. And then? Silence. They stopped. The word echoed. They learned, Throck said. And they did it without external enforcement. That mattered. Because every other species in that chamber had needed control, regulation, intervention. Humanity hadn't. They regulate themselves, Throck said. Imperfectly, unpredictably, but internally. The preservation delegate shook his head. That is not reliable. No, Throck agreed. It isn't. A pause. Then. But it is real. The chamber went quiet again. Because reality was harder to argue with than theory. Throck stepped forward one more step. I have fought wars for 3 centuries, he said. I understand threat. I understand danger. I understand what it means to face something that should not be trusted. He paused. Then spoke slowly, clearly, deliberately. These beings are dangerous. The chamber held its breath. But Throck didn't stop. They are dangerous because they do not follow patterns. They are dangerous because they adapt faster than we can predict. They are dangerous because they make decisions based on factors we do not measure. A pause. Then. The shift. But they are also something else. The chamber leaned in. They are connective. That word landed differently. Not technical. Not strategic. Something deeper. They form bonds rapidly, Throck said. With each other. With other species. With anything they choose to value. He glanced at the image again. And once that bond is formed. A pause. They protect it. The implication spread instantly. If humans bonded with the galaxy, they would fight for it. Not for dominance. For connection. And that was a completely different kind of power. Moravaith spoke quietly. You are suggesting they would defend others? Throck nodded. Yes. Even without obligation. Yes. Even without benefit. Yes. A silence followed. Then. That is inefficient, the preservation delegate said. Throck looked at him. Yes. A pause. But it works. That was the moment. The shift. Not complete. Not final. But undeniable. The chamber was no longer unified in fear. It was divided. Balanced. Uncertain. Moravaith stepped forward. Her voice calm. But firm. This is no longer a question of discovery. She looked around the chamber. At all of them. This is a question of integration. A pause. And risk. Another. We must decide what matters more. Her gaze returned to Earth. To the species that had already begun changing the equation. Without even trying. Control. A breath. Or growth. The spread began before the Council reached a decision. That alone should have been impossible. Newly contacted species were not supposed to interact freely with the wider galaxy. There were protocols. Layers of restriction. Controlled exposure. Gradual integration. Humanity followed none of them. Because humanity had never seen them. The first transmission appeared on an outer network. Unfiltered. Unapproved. Unrestricted. At first, it was dismissed. A minor anomaly. A data leak. Until it happened again. And again. And again. Within hours. Human signals were everywhere. Not coordinated. Not targeted. Just present. A council technician raised the alarm. They're broadcasting across open channels. Another responded immediately. That's not possible. Those channels are regulated. They are now. The chamber received live updates. Streams of content. Not encrypted. Not hidden. Shared. Music. Voices. Images. Stories. At first. Confusion. What is this? Is it coded communication? Is this strategic messaging? No. It's entertainment. That word spread uneasily, because it had no place in first contact protocols. A delegate activated one of the streams. Audio filled the chamber. Rhythm. Melody. Emotion. Unstructured. Unpredictable. Alive. A pause. Then. Why does it feel like that? No one answered. Because the question didn't make sense in technical terms. But everyone felt it. Another stream activated. Visual this time. Moving images. Humans interacting. Laughing. Arguing. Crying. Living. This is not filtered, a delegate said. They're showing everything. Another added. Their conflicts. Their failures. Their weaknesses. A pause. That is highly irregular. Most species presented only stability, control, strength. Humans did not. They presented themselves. Completely. The preservation delegate spoke sharply. This is reckless. Another responded. This is honest. The debate hadn't even started. And already it was shifting. More streams appeared. Scientific data. Open access research. Unrestricted. Are they aware this is being received? Someone asked. Yes, came the response. They are transmitting intentionally. The chamber grew quieter. Because that meant. This wasn't accidental. This was a choice. They are sharing knowledge without negotiation, Moravaith said. A pause. Without control. Another delegate added. Without expectation of return. That part unsettled them most. Because in galactic systems, exchange was structured, balanced, measured. Humans weren't measuring anything. They were giving. The data continued. Medical research, engineering concepts, philosophical discussions. Unfiltered, unregulated, unstoppable. They are flooding the networks, a technician said. Can we contain it? Moravaith asked. A pause. Then. No. That answer settled heavily. Because it meant something simple. The process had already moved beyond control. The preservation delegate stepped forward again. This is exactly what we feared. He gestured toward the incoming data. They do not respect boundaries. They do not follow protocol. They are destabilizing controlled systems. Another delegate interrupted. Or they are improving them. That sparked immediate reaction. Improvement requires structure. Structure requires control. And control limits growth. The argument reignited instantly. But this time, it wasn't just theory. It was happening. Outside the chamber. Across the galaxy. Reports began to arrive. From distant systems. From minor colonies. From independent networks. All saying the same thing. They are watching. They are listening. They are responding. A transmission appeared from a research world. A scientist speaking quickly. Excited. We accessed their medical database. There are treatment models we've never considered. Another from a trade hub. Their communication systems are inefficient, but adaptable. We're already modifying our own networks. Another. From a cultural archive world. Their art, there is no classification for it. It doesn't follow structure. It evokes response directly. A pause. Then. A quieter report. From a military outpost. Our personnel are requesting access to human media. The chamber stilled. Why? Moravaith asked. The response came carefully. They say it helps them understand each other. Silence. Because that was not a measurable outcome. Not strategic. Not tactical. But it was real. More reports followed. Faster now. Wider. Uncontrolled. They are integrating without permission. They are adapting external systems. They are influencing behavioral patterns. The preservation delegate's voice rose. This is contamination. Another voice responded immediately. This is evolution. The word hung in the air, because it reframed everything. Not disruption. Not damage. Change. Moravaith spoke again. Are they targeting specific systems? The technician shook his head. No. Then how are they spreading so quickly? A pause. Then. They're not targeting systems. Another. They're targeting attention. That was the difference. Not force. Not control. Interest. Curiosity. Engagement. Humans weren't pushing. They were pulling. And everything was responding. A delegate activated a live feed from a distant colony. 2 non-human species. Different. Historically incompatible. Sitting together. Watching a human broadcast. Laughing. The chamber watched in silence. Because that had not happened before. Not without mediation. Not without structure. Not without control. Another feed. A group of engineers. Multiple species. Working together. Using human designs. Not because they were required to. Because they wanted to. They are changing behavior patterns, someone said. Yes, another replied. Voluntarily. That was the part no one could explain. Humans weren't forcing integration. They weren't demanding compliance. They weren't imposing systems. They were offering something else. And others were choosing it. The preservation delegate spoke again. Quieter now. More controlled. This is more dangerous than direct conflict. Moravaith looked at him. Explain. He gestured toward the feeds. You can defend against force. You can prepare for attack. You can respond to threat. A pause. But how do you defend against something you choose to accept? Silence. Deep. Uncomfortable. Because the answer was. You couldn't. The chamber processed that. Slowly. Carefully. Reluctantly. Throck spoke again. They are not conquering, he said. No one argued. They are not invading. No one disagreed. They are not dominating. Silence. Then. He finished it. They are connecting. That word returned. Stronger this time. Wider. More dangerous. Because now. It wasn't theoretical. It was happening. Across systems. Across species. Across boundaries that had held for thousands of cycles. Moravaith looked at the data. The streams. The reactions. The changes. And she understood something. Something critical. Something irreversible. They did not wait to be accepted, she said. A pause. They simply began. The chamber remained silent. Because there was nothing left to argue. No protocol to apply. No system to enforce. No structure to contain what had already started. Moravaith spoke one final line. Quiet. Measured. But carrying more weight than anything before it. This is no longer first contact. A breath. This is influence. Another. And it has already begun. The decision came faster than expected. Not because the council had reached agreement. But because they had reached a limit. Humanity could not be ignored. It could not be contained. And it could not be understood through observation alone. So they did what the galaxy always did when faced with uncertainty. They tested it. The announcement was transmitted to Earth within a single cycle. Formal. Structured. Traditional. The trial of worthiness. An ancient system. Designed to answer a single question. Is a species ready to join galactic civilization? 3 evaluations. 3 controlled scenarios. 3 opportunities to prove alignment with established standards. Most species took decades to complete them. Humanity responded in less than a minute. We accept. That was it. No negotiation. No hesitation. No request for clarification. Captain Zur received the confirmation while still in orbit. She read it twice. Then a third time. They didn't ask what the tests are, her first officer said. Zer nodded slowly. They assumed they would find out. A pause. And solve them anyway. Small blue diamond test 1. Diplomatic resolution. The simulation chamber activated. A fully constructed scenario. 3 species. 1 system. Conflicting claims. Escalating tension. Imminent conflict. Standard procedure required. Controlled dialogue. Structured negotiation. Gradual compromise. The human delegation entered. 12 individuals. Different regions. Different cultures. Different personalities. And within seconds, they broke formation. They're not coordinating, an observer said. They're arguing, another added. Voices overlapped. Interruptions. Disagreement. Emotion. This is unacceptable, one council analyst whispered. They haven't even established protocol. Captain Zer said nothing. She watched. Because beneath the chaos, something was happening. One human leaned forward. Okay, this isn't working, he said. We're solving the wrong problem. The simulated representatives paused. Confused. That wasn't part of the script. What is the correct problem? One of them asked. The human shrugged. You don't actually want the system. Silence. You want the resources. Another human jumped in. Split it. A third. Share it. A fourth. Rotate access. The observers shifted. That violates sovereign principles. Those principles are causing the conflict, a human replied. Then change them. The room froze. Because that was not allowed. Rules were not variables. They were constants. But the humans treated them like suggestions. The negotiation accelerated. Not structured. Not controlled. But effective. Within hours. A solution emerged. Shared governance. Resource distribution. Conflict avoided. The observers reviewed the result. Stunned. They violated 37 protocols. Yes. They showed no procedural discipline. Yes. They interrupted formal dialogue repeatedly. Yes. A pause. But they solved it. Captain Zer spoke quietly. They focused on outcome. A council analyst responded. Diplomacy is not just outcome, it is process. Zer didn't look away from the chamber. Then perhaps the process is the problem. Small blue diamond test 2. Technological analysis. The second trial began immediately. No delay. No preparation period. The humans didn't ask for one. They were presented with an artifact. Ancient. Unknown. Complex. No instructions. No reference. No context. Standard procedure. Study. Model. Hypothesize. Test. The human team entered the lab. 20 individuals. Within minutes. They split. Into 4 separate groups. They're dividing resources inefficiently, an observer said. They're competing, another added. They're withholding data. Captain Zer observed carefully. Yes, she said. They are. The groups moved fast. Testing different theories. Running parallel experiments. Disagreeing constantly. At one point, 2 groups attempted to access the same system simultaneously. The result? Failure. Energy discharge. System instability. They're going to damage the artifact, someone said. But they didn't stop. They adjusted. Adapted. Reconfigured. Then, on the 4th day, one group made a breakthrough. Signal response. Electromagnetic interaction. They tried to keep it quiet. But within hours, everyone knew. And everything changed. The competition vanished. Instantly, data was shared. Models combined. The entire team shifted into collaboration. Seamlessly. How did they transition so quickly? An observer asked. Captain Zer answered. They had something real to work with. The progress accelerated. Dramatically. Within 5 days. They had mapped the system. understood its function. And then, they went further. They're building a replica, someone said. No, another corrected. They're improving it. That was not part of the test. That was not expected. That was not required. And yet, they did it anyway. The final report confirmed it. They solved it. A pause. And enhanced it. The observers remained silent. Because this was no longer evaluation. This was demonstration. Captain Zer spoke again. They don't wait for certainty. Another observer added quietly. They create it. Small Blue Diamond Test 3. Crisis Response. The final test was always the hardest. Because it wasn't about knowledge. Or negotiation. It was about choice. A scenario was initiated. A colony ship. 5,000 lives. Critical failure. Collision course with a star. Rescue capacity. 3,000. Standard solution. Select survivors. Preserve viability. Accept loss. The human team reviewed the scenario. For exactly 15 minutes. Then, they rejected it. We're not doing that, one of them said. The observers froze. That is the test, a council representative responded. No, the human replied. That's the assumption. A pause. We're changing it. Captain Zer leaned forward slightly. Proceed, she said. The humans moved immediately. No hesitation. No debate. Action. They modified the rescue vessel. Expanded capacity. Disabled safety limitations. Reconfigured internal systems. They're exceeding operational thresholds, an observer warned. Yes, Zer said. They are. They called for assistance. Civilian vessels. Private ships. Anything nearby. They are breaking protocol, another observer said. Yes. They are risking total failure. Yes. They are. Working, Zer said. The plan evolved in real time. Ships connected. Systems synchronized. Forces combined. The colony ship's trajectory shifted. Slightly. Just enough. Time extended. The rescue continued. Overcapacity. Overload. Over every limit defined by the simulation. They're going to collapse the system, someone said. But it didn't collapse. It held. Barely. Just enough. When the simulation ended, all 5,000 lives were saved. No selection. No sacrifice. No acceptance of loss. The observation chamber went silent. Completely. A council representative spoke slowly. That was not the intended solution. A human looked at him. It worked. You violated every regulation. Yes. You endangered all participants. Yes. A pause. Why? The answer came without hesitation. Because the alternative was unacceptable. Silence. Deep. Unavoidable. Captain Zer stood. Looking at the results. At the data. At the impossible made real. They don't accept limits, she said quietly. Another observer responded. They ignore them. Zer shook her head slightly. No. A pause. They redefine them. The chamber remained still. Because now, there was no argument left. Humanity had not just passed the tests. They had broken them. And in doing so, they had revealed something far more dangerous than failure. They had revealed possibility. Zer spoke one final line. Soft. Certain. They don't solve the problem. A breath. They change what the problem is. The chamber did not react immediately. Because reaction required understanding. And understanding had just been broken. The results of the trials hovered above the council floor. 3 scenarios. 3 outcomes. All successful. All invalid. That was the problem. Humanity had not failed the trials. But they had not followed them either. They had done something far more disruptive. They had made the trials irrelevant. Moravaith stood in silence, eyes fixed on the data. Her thoughts moving through every layer of what had just occurred. Diplomacy. Rewritten. Technology. Accelerated. Crisis. Refused. She spoke slowly. Confirm outcome. A council analyst responded. All objectives completed. A pause. Under non-compliant methodology. Another pause. With superior results. Silence followed. Because that sentence should not exist. It violated the foundation of the system itself. You cannot have non-compliance and superior performance, a preservation delegate said. Moravaith didn't look at him. And yet we do. That ended the argument. Not because it convinced anyone. Because it was true. Throck stepped forward again. His presence alone quieted the chamber. You designed these trials, he said. A few council members nodded. Yes. To measure readiness. Yes. To ensure stability. Yes. He looked up at the results. And what did they measure? A pause. No one answered. Because the answer had changed. They measured limitation, Throck said. The chamber shifted. Subtly, but unmistakably. They measured how well a species follows rules. Another pause. And humanity does not. A ripple of agreement. Fear returning. Structure attempting to rebuild itself. But Throck wasn't finished. They measured control. Yes. They measured predictability. Yes. They measured compliance. Yes, yes, yes. Throck turned slowly, facing the entire chamber. And humanity passed none of those. The tension rose. Because that sounded like failure. It sounded like confirmation of every fear. Then, he continued. And yet. Silence. They succeeded anyway. The room froze. Because that was the contradiction. The impossible overlap. Failure and success. At the same time. Moravaith spoke quietly. They did not operate within the system. No, Throck said. They operated beyond it. That word, beyond, shifted everything. Because it implied something dangerous. Not rebellion. Not resistance. Transcendence. The preservation delegate stepped forward again. This is exactly why they cannot be trusted. He gestured toward the data. They ignore structure. They reject limits. They destabilize controlled environments. Yes, Throck said. The delegate paused. Thrown slightly off balance. Yes, he repeated. Throck held his gaze. Yes. A silence followed. Then you agree, the delegate said. No, Throck replied. The single word landed harder than anything before it. Because it carried certainty, clarity, finality. I agree with your observation, Throck said. A pause. I reject your conclusion. The chamber leaned forward. Every species. Every mind. Waiting. Explain, Moravaith said. Throck turned back to the projection. To the data. To the impossible results. You believe their unpredictability is a weakness, he said. Yes. You believe their lack of control is a risk. Yes. You believe their refusal to follow structure is dangerous. Yes. Throck nodded once. It is. The room stilled again. Then, he stepped closer, and lowered his voice. But you are measuring them incorrectly. That line changed everything. Because it challenged not the subject, but the system observing it. They are not a system to be controlled, Throck said. They are a system that evolves. A pause. And evolution. He let the word settle. Is not predictable. Moravaith watched him carefully. You are suggesting we cannot measure them. No, Throck said. I am suggesting we are using the wrong metrics. Another shift. Deeper this time. Because now, the problem wasn't humanity. It was the framework judging them. They do not fail, Throck continued. They iterate. The word returned. Stronger. Clearer. More dangerous. They do not break under pressure. They accelerate. They do not accept impossible conditions. They redefine them. Each line struck like impact, because each one matched the data perfectly. The preservation delegate spoke again. Quieter now. Less certain. That is not stability. No, Throck said. It isn't. A pause. Then. It is progress. Silence. Deep. Unavoidable. Because that word, progress, had not been part of the system for a long time. Not real progress. Not disruptive progress. The kind that changed things. The kind that broke things. The kind that forced evolution. Moraveth stepped forward. Her voice lower now. More focused. If we accept that. A pause. Then we accept uncertainty. Yes, Throck said. If we accept uncertainty. Another pause. We lose control. Yes. The chamber reacted again. Instinctively. Because control was everything. Control was safety. Control was survival. Control was civilization. And now, they were being asked to consider something else. Throck spoke one final time. And this time, there was no hesitation. No uncertainty. No room for interpretation. You are not deciding whether humanity is safe, he said. The chamber went still. You are deciding whether the future is. A pause. Long. Heavy. Irreversible. Because that reframed everything. Not about humans. About direction. About growth. About what came next. Moraveth looked back at the data. At the trials. At the impossible outcomes. At the species that had not followed a single rule. And still succeeded. She understood it now. Not fully. Not comfortably. But enough. They are not dangerous because they destroy, she said quietly. A breath. They are dangerous because they change the rules. Throck nodded once. Yes. Another pause. Then. The final realization. Delivered softly. But carrying more weight than anything before it. They don't just solve problems. Moraveth continued it. They change what is possible. Silence. Total. Absolute. Because there was nothing left to argue. Nothing left to prove. Nothing left to deny. Humanity had already demonstrated it. And now, the galaxy had to decide what to do with it. The chamber did not move. Because movement would imply certainty. And there was none. For the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Council, an institution built on structure, prediction, and control, stood at the edge of a decision it could not model. Humanity had not been contained. Not been understood. Not been categorized. And yet, it had been experienced. Moraveth stepped forward slowly. Not as speaker. Not as authority. But as something else. A witness. We will proceed to final deliberation, she said. Her voice carried, but without force. It didn't need it. Every species was already listening. This decision is not procedural. A pause. It is foundational. She let that settle. Because it mattered. This was not about whether humanity qualified. It was about whether the galaxy itself would remain the same. Or not. Each representative will speak, Moraveth continued. Not for their systems. Another pause. But for their understanding. That changed the tone immediately. Because this was no longer politics. It was philosophy. The first to step forward was the preservation delegate. Predictable. Controlled. Certain. We were not built for uncertainty, he said. His voice steady. Grounded. We were built to survive it. He gestured toward the projection of Earth. Toward the data. Toward the trials. This species does not align with our systems. They do not follow our structures. They do not respect our boundaries. A pause. And they do not need to. That line hit harder than expected. Because it was true. They have developed independently. Evolved without guidance. Achieved capabilities without integration. He stepped closer. And now they arrive, not by force, but by influence. Another pause. That is more dangerous. The chamber remained silent, because no one could deny the logic. If we allow this, he continued, we do not simply add a new species. A breath. We introduce instability into a system that has preserved peace for millennia. He turned toward Moravaith. And we risk everything that peace has built. He stepped back, his position clear, his fear defined, control over change. The next to step forward was unexpected. The delegate from the outer colonies. Human descended. Different, but connected. She stood without hesitation. You are right, she said. The chamber shifted. Because agreement wasn't expected. He is right, she repeated. They are unstable. They are unpredictable. They are disruptive. A pause. Then, that is why we need them. The chamber reacted immediately. But she continued. We did not build a perfect system, she said. We built a stable one. She gestured around the chamber. At the cost of growth. At the cost of change. At the cost of possibility. She turned toward the data. Humanity does not preserve what exists. A pause. They expand it. That word landed differently. Less threatening. More expansive. They make mistakes, she said. Yes. They fail. Yes. They break things. Yes, yes, yes. The chamber aligned again. And then, she broke it. And then they fix them. Silence. Because that part was harder to argue against. They do not wait for permission to improve, she continued. They do not wait for certainty. They do not wait for safety. A pause. They move forward. Her voice lowered slightly. And they bring others with them. That line shifted everything again. Because it wasn't about humanity alone. It was about impact. Influence. Shared change. She stepped back. Her position clear. Growth over control. The chamber held the tension. Balanced. Unresolved. Until Commander Throck stepped forward. The final voice. The one no one could ignore. I have fought for control, he said. For order. For stability. A pause. And I have won. The chamber listened. Because victory from a warrior meant something. But I have also seen what happens after. Another pause. When nothing changes. Silence. When everything stops. He turned slowly. Looking at every representative. Every species. Every civilization that had chosen safety over evolution. You fear them, he said. No denial. No resistance. Because it was true. You fear what they represent. Another pause. Not because they are stronger. A breath. But because they are different. He gestured toward the projection. They are flawed. Yes. They are chaotic. Yes. They are unpredictable. Yes, yes, yes. The chamber aligned again. One last time. And then, he ended it. They are alive. That word landed deeper than anything else. Because it wasn't technical. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't measurable. It was fundamental. They feel more, Throck said. They risk more. They lose more. A pause. And because of that. He looked directly at Moravaith. They achieve more. Silence. Heavy. Final. Moravaith closed her eyes for a moment. Not long. Just enough to feel the weight of what came next. Then she opened them. Decision made. We will vote. The chamber activated. Lights shifted. Systems aligned. Each representative prepared to cast their decision. Not based on data. Not based on models. But based on something far more difficult. Belief. Moravaith spoke one final time before the vote. Understand this, she said. Her voice steady. Clear. Unavoidable. You are not voting on humanity. A pause. You are voting on what kind of galaxy you want to exist. Silence. Then, the vote began. One by one. Systems lit. Decisions recorded. Tension building with each passing moment. Control. Growth. Stability. Change. The chamber watched. Waited. Counted. And as the final votes locked into place, the result began to form. Not unanimous. Not perfect. But decisive. Moravaith looked at the outcome. Then at the chamber. Then at the image of Earth. She spoke the final verdict. And with it, the future. Humanity will be granted provisional integration into the Galactic Council. A ripple of reaction spread instantly, but she raised her hand. And continued. Not because they are safe. A pause. Not because they are controlled. Another. But because they represent something we no longer do. She looked across the chamber. At every species. Every system. Every carefully maintained structure. Change. Silence. Then. The final line. Delivered with absolute clarity. We will not contain them. A breath. We will evolve with them. The change did not arrive all at once. There was no single moment. No sudden shift. No instant transformation. At first. It was barely noticeable. A minor adjustment in communication protocols. A slight increase in cross-species interaction. A few new channels opened. A few old restrictions loosened. Nothing dramatic. Nothing disruptive. Nothing that couldn't be explained as a natural progression. But it wasn't. Because beneath those small changes, something else was happening. Something deeper. Something irreversible. It began with conversation. Not formal. Not structured. Not controlled. Just conversation. Species that had never spoken directly started speaking. Not because they were required to. Because they wanted to. Human communication systems spread quietly. Not replacing existing networks. Expanding them. Adding layers. Flexibility. Emotion. Misunderstandings still happened. Arguments still occurred. But something new followed them. Resolution. Not imposed. Chosen. Trade changed next. Slowly. Subtly. Then all at once. Not in structure. But in intent. Transactions became collaborative. Less about exchange. More about improvement. Human engineers worked alongside alien designers. Not competing. Not dominating. Building. Together. Systems improved. Faster. Stronger. Not because one species led. But because all of them contributed. Conflict did not disappear. It evolved. Disputes still arose. Differences still mattered. But resolution shifted. Less control. More understanding. Not perfect. Never perfect. But moving. Always moving. Captain Zer stood at the observation deck of the Harmonious Endeavour, watching a new kind of traffic flow through the stars. Ships from different systems. Different species. Different purposes. Moving together. Not in formation. Not in control. But in coordination. It wasn't orderly. It wasn't predictable. It was alive. Commander Throck stood beside her. Silent. Observing. This is not what I expected, he said. Zer nodded slightly. No. A pause. But it works. Throck considered that. Then nodded once. Yes. Another pause. Then. They are everywhere. Zer allowed herself the smallest shift in expression. Yes. Human influence had spread beyond containment. Beyond expectation. Beyond prediction. Not as domination. Not as control. But as presence. Ideas. Connections. Moments. Small things. Everywhere. On a distant colony. A human sat beside a being of pure energy. Explaining humor. Badly. Both of them laughing anyway. On a research station. 3 species argued over a design. A human interrupted. Why not try all 3? They did. It worked. On a transport vessel. A human shared food with a crew that didn't require it. They tried it anyway. Not because they needed to. Because they were curious. Small moments. Insignificant. Individually. Transformative. Together. The council still existed. Structure remained. Control had not vanished. But it had changed. It adapted. Expanded. Made room for something it had not been designed to handle. Uncertainty. And somehow, it did not collapse. It improved. Moravaith stood once more in the chamber. Not as it had been, but as it had become. Less rigid. Less silent. More dynamic. Reports continued to arrive. Not warnings. Not alarms. Updates. Growth. Change. Progress. She read them carefully. Then looked up. At the chamber. At the species. At the system that had once resisted everything it now allowed. You were right, she said quietly. Throck stood beside her. Yes. A pause. They are dangerous. Another. But not in the way we feared. Moravaith nodded. They don't destroy systems. A breath. They transform them. On Earth. Life continued. Unaware of how much had changed beyond it. And yet, completely responsible for it. Humans still argued. Still failed. Still made mistakes. Still learned. Still tried. Nothing about them had become perfect. And that was the point. Captain Zer returned to Earth one final time. Not as a representative. Not as an observer. But as something else. A participant. She walked once more through the same station. The same corridors. The same spaces that had once confused her. Now, they made sense. Not logically. Not structurally. But intuitively. Chen met her again. Same smile. Same presence. You came back, she said. Zer nodded. Yes. A pause. I wanted to understand. Chen tilted her head slightly. And? Zer looked around. At the movement. The life. The connection. Then. She answered. I still don't. Chen smiled. Good. Zer blinked once. That is, good. Chen nodded. Yeah. A pause. If you fully understand something. She shrugged slightly. It usually means it stopped changing. Zer processed that. Slowly. Carefully. Then. She nodded. Because now. She understood something else. Not humanity. Not completely. But the direction they moved. Forward. Always forward. Throck's words echoed in her mind. They make you care. And he had been right. That was the danger. That was the power. That was the difference. The final council record was entered that cycle. Not as a warning. Not as a restriction. But as a statement. A recognition. A truth. It read. Humanity has not altered the galaxy through force. A pause. Then. Humanity has altered the galaxy through connection. Another. Final. Irreversible. They did not join the system. A breath. They changed what it means to be part of it. And far beyond the council. Far beyond the structure. Far beyond anything that could be measured or controlled. The effect continued. Quietly. Relentlessly. Inevitably. Because humanity did not arrive as conquerors. They did not arrive as rulers. They did not arrive as something to be feared. They arrived as something far more difficult to resist. Something the galaxy had not been prepared for. Something it could not contain. And something it would never be able to remove. They arrived as change. And the galaxy, for the first time in its history, did not try to stop it. It chose to become something new. Because in the end, the greatest discovery was not that humanity existed. It was this. They were never meant to fit into the galaxy. They were meant to redefine it.